Greg Gust with the National Weather Service in Grand Forks, and I'm here with Amanda Lee, our service hydrologist, giving you the prospects for a 2020 spring flood. Bottom line up front, we are currently at or higher in our outlook prospects than we were for the 2019 spring flood. Last year was a top 10 flood along the main stem red, primarily, not so much on the tributaries, except in the southern part of the basin. But this year very well could be a top 5 flood, though much is left to be determined. We are on track for a record fall-winter period precipitation-wise. The fall to early winter period, that going back from September 1st through December, was a record for precipitation in the area. Soils are really, really wet underlying the snow cover now. And late winter to early spring, that January, February, March, April, May, precipitation is tracking high and is expected to continue that track. The good news, of course, our frost depths and our ice thicknesses are lower than normal and much less than in 2019. So that's the good news. But the not so good news is that there's lots of winter yet to go. Looking at the flood risk by category, as at the 50% or greater risk of flooding, much of the area is in the moderate to major. I will point out that as you look at some of those greens in the North Country, but also some points in the South, one of the things that we are seeing more and more is as the major diversion channels come into play. Looking at the south part of the basin, that Cheyenne-West Fargo diversion has had a marked decrease on the flooding into the West Fargo area. And so you're seeing that red showing up on the West Fargo diversion rather than the deep purple that it normally would have been without a diversion. Down in Wahpeton Breckenridge, same type of thing. The Breckenridge diversion, which first came into play in 2006 flood, but that is now deviating a fair amount of flow around the gauge there at Wahpeton. So again, Wahpeton seeing the effect with a lower flood risk in the city itself. Outside the city, still fairly significant flooding expected. Moving up, Hartsville-Cooley diversion to the east of East Grand Forks, that's in play, as well as a diversion on the west side of Grand Forks, picking up some of the Cooley flows that would come in and diverting those to north of town. So near Warren, the diversion up there that came into play in 2006 as well. Roseau's diversion has been in play now since 2015. That showed up with water flow last in the 2019 flood. So again, that takes the risk down substantially near Roseau. This will be the first year that there's a bypass in Grafton in effect. The Grafton numbers I'll speak to more detail here as we go on. Certainly should reduce flooding threat in the city of Grafton itself. So set the stage for what is going on here. We still have had snow this winter, but it's been kind of mild. If you look at the December 1st through now time frame, been very near normal on average when you take the deep cold and the warmer temperatures we're seeing now into effect. And if you look back though through the September, October, November time frame, we were below normal throughout most of that period. So on the whole, this fall winter period has been actually a degree or two colder than normal. We have heard about the record heat across the globe in 2019, but if you look at that global picture there, you'll see that blue area. Ooh, who's that? Well, that would be us that have been colder than normal overall. In our region, 2019 was cold, but not record cold. You'll see the below normal to much below normal temperatures across the Dakotas and Minnesota. What we were, though, is we were wet to record wet across much of our area as well. Again, you see the heaviest precipitation much above record, picking up through south central and east central North Dakota. Most of our Red River Basin above average, not as much above average in the far northern part of North Dakota, far northern Minnesota, but still above average overall for the calendar year of 2019. So that leads to this statewide rankings for the wettest year on record across North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And that's just another look at, for the continental U.S., overall, the annual trend. You can see the couple of inch increase overall across the nation in the last 120 years. 2019 sitting in second place overall for wetness across the continental U.S. Looking at our climate divisions making up the Red River Basin, and I can see that, yes, we were the new record basin average at 29.15 inches. And again, that same trend here over 2.5 inches in moisture that we've on average increased. But you can see that background bluish blue line, that's the 10-year running average. So you can see how we had came off a wet cycle at the end of the early 1900s into the dirty 30s, if you will, with that much reduced precipitation, then up into what is called the mid-century normal period, where although precipitation, was quite variable, it at least stayed in a less cantankerous mode, if you will. Certainly since the late 1992-93 time period, we've been in a much wetter precipitation pattern across the Red River Basin. If we look at this map, which is showing the flow coming up out of the southern basin into Wahpeton, greenish brownish areas that are the basins that collect and flow through Fargo itself, less than a quarter of that overall basin area. Then you see those large areas that come in from east central North Dakota and northwest Minnesota that flow in between Fargo and Grand Forks, leading to the contributed flow there at the East Grand Forks gauge. And then the purplish areas coming in that contribute and add up at Pembina and Emerson, the border crossing there. The brown area, which is the Roseau on the Minnesota side of the river, the Roseau River watershed, that does come into the Red River on the Canadian side of the border, but there are some breakout flows there right up near the U.S. border where a lot of water will start to dump into the northern branch of the two rivers there and come in that way. So, but now this graphic here just shows in red the combined flow coming into Fargo, in green the combined flow adding in between Fargo and Grand Forks, and then the purplish blue line from the northern part of the basin. And you can see that increasing overall trend through the years, especially in the coming into Fargo and into Grand Forks. And 2011 showing the largest annual water year flow ever across the Red River Basin, all the way up through Winnipeg, and a little bit of a decrease years. We've had some drier years off and on in these 2010s, and certainly 2019 jumping right back up with an overall large-scale flow. So I asked this question: when does the majority of our runoff and stream flow actually occur in these Northern Plains rivers? And if you look at that graphic, that's the 2018 hydrograph for Grand Forks, and that very high point that's showing up there, that's the spring period. That's March, April, May. And that's a logarithmic chart on the side there. So that area under the curve showing up there is really a very huge area volume-wise for water flow. And then it tapers off and you get substantially less through a normal year. We did have the big bumps coming in late October, November from secondary precipitation this year yet. So generally it's in the spring. Generally it's charged with that melting snowpack, generally with the landscape still frozen or at least not yet growing. So before our heavier convective summer rains. Now the summertime precipitation, a lot of that is soaked up by the ground. It's used by the growing plants. So you don't see a lot of runoff into the river system. But then again, as the crop processes have shut down, as evapotranspiration has overall decreased, we could see some runoff again in the fall period. I've superimposed on that now just a general river type cross section for this area. And you can see that most of the time during the year, rivers are flowing at the lower parts of that overall channel where it's much less of a cross section, much less overall flow coming through there. But during these big floods, it's spreading out over a much broader area up and out of the basin. You're getting a much more optimized, if you will, flow. It's maximized during that time period. So again, huge amounts of water in these spring runoff periods. And so looking at what contributes to that, I've now focused in on the September through December, then January through April periods, and looking at the total precipitation. And you can see, again, same type of high degree of variability year to year. But now looking at these points and at this far right end, I have a question mark because I know what has happened in September, October, November, and December of 2019. But yet for January, February, March, and April of 2020, well, we don't know. So I just used the long-term averages in there. And just with long-term average precipitation for those months, we end up in second place overall for the runoff. And we only need to run another inch or so above normal, and we could set a new record for that runoff period. And that lines up very nicely with those peaks in annual flow. So that's the whole purpose of just to show most of our flow, whether it's the annual water year or the specific spring period, is focused on that, the fall, winter, and early spring precipitation and spring runoff. These are bulk averages for the entire basin, and they're useful for a general analysis and trends, but not so useful for a specific point forecast, which you may all be concerned about, but that is coming up here now. Just again, the fall period, wetter than normal across this northern plains area. Here's from September 1st to just a couple days ago, and you can see the departure from mean. So that's above normal precipitation, where we're dealing with several inches throughout the state of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota. You can see those darker greens into blue showing up, where you're dealing with 6 to 8 inches above normal precipitation in some areas just during that September 1st till now period. Did I mention that we've been wet? Well, yes. So Fargo at this point is holding at the second wettest on record for this time period, and much of that southern basin as well. As you get through the central and northern part of the Red River Basin here in the States, we're in first place soundly across this area. And again, that's 4 to 8 inches above normal for the period. This is that hydrograph again. The left-hand side of that is the 2018 curve. For much of the area, that was a fairly near normal type of flow in 2018. 2019 on the right-hand side showing much above normal flow, not quite record in the spring at all. But if you look at that circled area, the fall period of 2019, you can see that that was a record fall flood. And when I say record, it broke the previous record fall flood by a good 10 feet and 40% greater volume flow. Those bumps underneath there, those are the falls of 2008, 2009, and 2010. And pretty much from Fargo north, those are the record fall runoff years. And north of Fargo, all the points on the Red River set new floods of record for the fall period. In Fargo itself, it came in just under that record that was set back in October of 2008, which preceded the 2009 flooding, and came in just about what the 2010 peak was over there. So in general now, the flow at freeze up just was at or near record high levels across most of the basin. And also in that time period, we had still water parked on the landscape from all those heavy rains. So this was a picture taken back in early November north of Grand Forks here. There's water on the landscape with in fields that were still waiting to be harvested. Here's a harvested field north of Grand Forks, but it's ice now as things are freezing up. So water freezing on the landscape, and in some places, again, not able to get to the rivers and drain off in time. So we, underneath our snowpack, we have areas where there's still water that from that fall flooding that's frozen on the landscape. We have water in ditches parked from that, and even all the way down into the southern parts of the basin as well. There's excess water parked in ditches and on the landscape. And of course, fields that weren't harvested. That's a sugar beet field here near Grand Forks. Here's a corn field in eastern North Dakota, and that's just a shot of somebody trying to harvest corn in the snow. One thing that we do notice with these crops standing there, that there's not as deep of a frost underneath those unharvested fields, because the snow in that extended area is acting as a good insulator. So people that are trying to harvest are finding they can still break through into the slushy and unfrozen ground below. And this was an image from the 9th of December, and it's right in the east central part of North Dakota. You can see Hillsboro and Mayville showing up on there. But that was cornfields peeking through the snow cover.